The legendary British comedian Benny Hill, who died aged 68 in 1992, divided opinion like no other comedian, before or since. To many, his humour is sexist and totally at odds with modern sensibilities. Others who saw him at his peak in the 60s, 70s and early 80s saw a hilarious comedian, a unique innovator, and a pioneer of television. What is beyond doubt is that Hill, whose show sold everywhere regardless of language barriers, was the greatest comedy export Britain has ever produced. Yet by the end of the 1980s, he was cast aside by the same TV companies for whom he had made millions. Benny Hill was born Alfred Hawthorne Hill in Southampton in 1924. His father Alfred had been a circus performer, but retired after the war to run a so-called surgical appliances store, which in reality mainly sold contraceptives. Benny had a gift for impressions and loved comedy in the movies. Working a variety of jobs, he also became involved in semi-pro local entertainment work. After a while, this provided more income than regular work, so he upped sticks and moved to London. Initially sleeping rough, he found a job as a props boy. Eventually he got stage work in a show called Follow the Fun, touring the UK billed as Alf Hill. In 1943, his brother suggested using Benny as a tribute to Jack Benny, whom they both admired. Drafted into the Army for National Service, he was initially a regular squatty, before managing to get into Army entertainments, known as Stars in Battle Dress or Combined Services Entertainment, CSE. There, he was spotted by Colonel Richard Stone, who would become his agent after he was demobbed in 1947. After working the clubs, Hill landed a job as Reg Varney's straight man in a summer season at Margate. They also worked together at the London Palladium. However, when he went on the road as a solo comedian, especially in the notoriously tough working men's clubs of Northern England, he bombed. Out of work for months, Benny started writing material for television, believing that this was his medium. Arranging a meeting with Ronnie Waldman, then head of light entertainment at the BBC, whom he did not know, he presented his scripts. Waldman was not only impressed by the sketches, he saw something special in Hill's performances of them, and 3 weeks later, Benny Hill began appearing on TV and radio spots. Audiences loved his mixture of bizarre characters, impressions, and innuendo-laced jokes. By 1955, The Benny Hill Show was born. Hill had correctly predicted that television was made for him. His ideas were also revolutionary. Split screen, used most notably in the famous Jukebox Jury sketch, is nothing now. Back then, audiences were amazed. According to TV executive Michael Grade, Hill just had a natural gift, not only for performing on television, but also for its technical elements. He was now a famous face and won Television Personality of the Year. In his personal life, he remained alone, although he was interested in women and the opportunities fame gave him. Colleagues believed that he was so wrapped up in his comedy that while he loved women, he loved his show and career much more. Over time, Hill honed the format that would become legendary. Camera tricks, recurring characters such as Fred Scuttle, parodies of popular culture, especially television and film, cleverly worded songs, and an ensemble cast that he always worked with. His popularity and adaptability saw him branch out into films, and he is still fondly remembered for superb performances in Chitty Chitty Bang Bang and The Italian Job. In 1969, Hill stunned the BBC by moving to Thames Television. One of his TV specials for Thames that year had more viewers than the moon landing. A big fan of Charlie Chaplin and Buster Keaton, By now he began to add silent comedy elements to the Benny Hill Show. Whether by design or not, this element would prime the Benny Hill Show for export to the whole world. When he wasn't working on his show, Hill was rarely seen in public. He travelled widely, particularly to France, where he found comedy inspiration in the clubs and shows of Paris. Continuing to live in a succession of sparsely furnished flats, he seemed unaware and uninterested in what began to happen in the late 1970s. January 1979 marked the first transmission of the Benny Hill Show in America. Starting with just half a dozen stations, the show quickly exploded in popularity, taking the US by storm. Such was the effect, it was rumoured that police in major US cities often greeted each other with Fred Scuttle salutes. In 1980, Hill introduced the Hills Angels dance troupe to his show. Having seen the high ratings for Kenny Everett's TV show, which heavily featured the dance troupe Hot Gossip, Benny followed suit. Though it seemed logical at the time, it may have marked the start of his downfall. While Everett was in his 30s at the time, Hill was in his mid-50s. Some began questioning whether it was appropriate that a man of that age was cavorting with women young enough to be his daughter. On The Terry Wogan Show, comedian and writer Ben Elton of the so-called alternative comedy generation said, "When a comedian can end every single show tearing off a woman's clothes and then chasing her around a park in her underwear, in a world where women can't even walk safely in the parks, is pretty worrying." Calls were now becoming louder against Hill's style of comedy in general, and his show in particular. In 1989, Benny was summoned to a meeting at Thames Television and abruptly told by John Howard Davies, head of Light Entertainment, that his show was being cancelled. Official reasons were that ratings were falling, costs were rising, and that the format was getting a little tired. All of these were probably true, but there was also a changing of the guard in comedy, and Benny Hill was part of the past. Devastated by the loss of his show, Benny stopped looking after himself, and his health deteriorated. There were rumours of a return to TV, but broadcasters demanded changes to the format, something that Hill felt he could never agree to. Marooned in his flat, watching TV and eating, he was going downhill fast. After a mild heart attack on the 24th of February 1992, Benny was told that he needed heart bypass surgery, but he declined. Over the Easter weekend in 1992, he was found dead in his flat, the official date of death being the 20th of April. He left an estate of £7.5 million, a staggering amount of money for a television personality in 1992. And with no heirs, it was divided equally among 7 nieces and nephews. Benny Hill was undoubtedly one of the most successful and loved comedians of the 20th century. A genuine innovator and unique talent, it is ridiculous that his show is almost nowhere to be found on terrestrial TV in the country of his birth. At his best, he was brilliant and hilarious, but he lingered too long with a tiring format that was out of its time, ignoring the old showbiz adage, always leave them wanting more.